My son looked me in the eye and said, "You should be grateful we even talked to you." So I smiled, went silent, and started moving the family business into my name alone. My son said it at the Christmas party like he was doing me a favor. 37 years old, MBA from Emory, standing in a room full of people whose paychecks I had signed every other Friday for 2 decades. He looked me in the eye, smiled the way men smile when they've decided they're being generous, and said, "You know, Mom, most parents in your situation would be pushed out completely. You should really be grateful we still talk to you." I smiled back, I nodded, and I went completely, absolutely quiet, because I had known something he didn't for 4 months. I knew what was in the folder sitting in my attorney's briefcase. I knew what was scheduled for February 18th, and I knew, with the particular clarity of a woman who has been reading contracts since before her children could tie their own shoes, exactly how this was going to end. My name is Margaret Hutcherson. I am 67 years old, and I built Hutcherson Printing from a rented warehouse on Elm Industrial Drive with one broken Heidelberg offset press and a smell of ink and mildew that never fully left the back of my throat for the first 3 years. That was 1983. Robert was the dreamer. He had vision the way some men do. Large, optimistic, completely unbothered by the logistical nightmare of executing it. He could walk a client through a pitch and make them feel like they were buying into something inevitable. He had a handshake you remembered. He had stories he told at company dinners that made everyone feel chosen. What Robert couldn't do was a P&L statement. What Robert couldn't do was negotiate net 60 payment terms with a paper supplier who had decided we were too small to take seriously. What Robert couldn't do was rebuild our entire payroll system after the accountant we'd trusted for 6 years turned out to have been skimming. That was me. The invoices, the taxes, the supplier calls, the loan applications at 3 different banks before the 4th one said yes. The systems, the real unglamorous systems that kept us alive through recessions and contract losses and a fire in the finishing room in 1991 that cost us $140,000 we didn't technically have. Robert used to say it openly, at company dinners, to clients, to anyone who would listen. This business would collapse without Margaret. She is the brains of this operation. He meant it. I knew he meant it. Our children were there for those dinners. I don't think they were listening. Robert died in March of 2003. Heart attack at 58, in the parking lot of a client's building. He was carrying a portfolio of samples. His assistant found him. I did not fall apart. I had 2 children in their 20s and 75 employees and $4.2 million in outstanding receivables and a company that needed to keep running. So I did not fall apart. I went to the office on the 4th day after the funeral and I sat at Robert's desk, our desk really, the one we'd shared in the early years, and I kept going. David came home 3 weeks later. He had his MBA from Emory and the certainty of a man who has spent 2 years being taught that management is a transferable skill that doesn't require knowledge of what is actually being managed. He wanted the vice president title, his own office, a company car. He said, and I remember this precisely, "Dad would have wanted me running this." I made him start in client relations. He was furious. He used words like insult and trust and my own family's company. That last phrase stuck with me. My company, not mine, not ours, his. I told him, "You will understand this business from the ground up, or you will not understand it at all." He stayed. He was good at the client work, actually. He had Robert's charm without Robert's complete indifference to detail. I watched him grow. I thought, this will be fine. I thought, he's learning. He'll understand eventually what it took to build this. Caroline joined 2 years later. She had a background in advertising and she was creative and sharp and wanted to run the marketing department. I gave her a senior role under our then director, a woman named Petra who had been with us since 1997. Caroline called it condescending. She called me controlling. She said, in a meeting in front of 3 other people, that I couldn't help myself from needing to manage everything because I didn't trust anyone. I let it go because I thought that was what mothers did. I made room. I kept making room. I told myself they were young and ambitious, and that ambition was something I had built into this company from the beginning, so I should be glad to see it in them. I didn't realize they expected me to disappear. It happened the way these things happen, slowly at first, then fast enough to leave marks. The first time I noticed something was off, it was a Tuesday in early 2019. I walked into the weekly operations review, and the slides on the screen were already different from the deck I had been sent. Supplier contracts, restructured, 3 new vendor relationships I hadn't approved. David saw my face and said smoothly that they'd made a few updates overnight based on a client call. I let it go. Then in March, I CC'd myself on a client communication thread and found that my emails had been removed from the chain somewhere around email 14. When I mentioned it, Caroline said I'd probably just missed the notification. Her voice had a particular flatness that I filed away without knowing why. I let it go. In April, our production manager Gary, who had been with us for 19 years and once drove 2 hours at midnight to help me sort out a machine failure before a morning print run, stopped coming to me with operational questions. I found out a month later that he'd been told, gently, by David's assistant, to route anything above a certain dollar threshold through David's office. I asked Gary about it directly. He was uncomfortable in a way I had never seen him be uncomfortable around me. He said he was sure it was just a communication thing. He couldn't meet my eyes. My stomach went cold. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't drink and I thought, something is happening. And I thought, you are 64 years old and you built this company and you are not imagining it. I started watching more carefully. The staff changes were the clearest signal. New people, 3 of them, hired in a 6-month period, who had been brought in by David and who reported exclusively to him. None of them had printing industry backgrounds. 2 of them had backgrounds in restructuring consulting, which is a phrase that means something very specific in a business business context, and it isn't good. There was a woman named Sherry in admin who had been my assistant for 11 years. In October of 2019, she asked very quietly, while refilling the printer in my office, if I was okay. I asked her what she meant. She looked at the door. She said, "People have been told things about your plans, about stepping back." She paused. I wanted you to know that's what people have been told." I thanked her. I went home. I poured the glass of water, and I did not sleep. The document was buried in the third folder of a stack David handed me in late October. "Just standard updates, Mom," he said. "Mostly routine governance amendments. Legal wants everything current. I am a woman who has signed contracts for 40 years. I do not sign anything without reading it. I have never signed anything without reading it." It took me 45 minutes that evening to find the clause, because it was written to look like standard succession language, the kind of thing that sounds responsible and forward-thinking and completely harmless until you read the specific trigger conditions. In the event the majority shareholder voluntarily steps down from operational management, or is determined by a qualified medical professional to be unable to fulfill her duties, minority shares held by David Hutcherson and Caroline Hutcherson shall automatically transfer. I read it again. I read it a third time. I had signed it. My signature was on page 11 under a heading that said Governance Amendment 7, Succession Continuity. I had signed it with a stack of 6 other documents on a Thursday afternoon when David had mentioned he had a flight to catch. I put the folder down on my kitchen table. My hands weren't shaking. I remember being surprised by that. I sat very still for a long time and I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain exactly, but the specific sensation of understanding something you cannot ununderstand. Then I went to David's shared drive. I had admin access to the company server. I had always had admin access to the company server because I had set it up, because I had paid for it, because it ran on infrastructure I had authorized in 2011 and updated in 2016. I found the folder in 40 minutes. It was labeled Operations Review, Internal, Benign, Unremarkable, the kind of label that is designed to be passed over. The emails were organized by date. There were 43 of them spanning 8 months. I read them all. David to Caroline, February 12th. "We need to accelerate the timeline. The Q3 numbers give us cover. Frame it as honoring her legacy. People respond to that emotional angle." Caroline to David, February 14th. "Start documenting her mistakes. Build a paper trail in case she resists. I've already talked to HR about her erratic behavior in the November meeting. What about salary reduction as leverage?" David to an external address I didn't recognize, March 3rd. "I think she may be showing early signs of cognitive decline. We've noticed some confusion, some repetition. We may need to have this documented by a professional for legal purposes going forward." I read that one 4 times. Cognitive decline. My son had written to a consultant. I identified him 3 days later as a man named Terrence Vogel, a business transition specialist out of Atlanta, to discuss having me legally declared incompetent. I was 64 years old and I still ran every major vendor relationship in the company. I still knew our equipment specs by heart. I still caught errors in financial reports that 2 younger eyes had missed. I had not forgotten a client's name in 35 years of doing this work. But my son had written in a recoverable email that he was considering having me declared incompetent. I sat in my kitchen at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, and I felt the sadness move through me like something physical, something that travels through the body before it finds somewhere to settle. Then it hardened. I did not call them. I did not send an email. I did not say a single word. I went to work. The first call I made was to Eleanor Marsh. Eleanor is a corporate attorney in Atlanta who has been practicing business law for 31 years. We had used her firm for major transactions 3 times before, and she had a quality I valued above everything else in a legal professional. She was not surprised by anything. I called her at 8:15 a.m. on a Wednesday, and I said, "I need to come in. I have documents. I need to understand what my options are." She said, "I have Thursday at 2. I brought everything. The signed governance amendment, the emails, the Terrence Vogel correspondence, the HR notes about my behavior that I'd found in a subfolder. I laid it on her conference table, and I sat in the chair across from her, and I watched her read. Eleanor Marsh does not have an expressive face. That is a professional asset she has probably spent 30 years cultivating. But when she got to the David to Vogel email about cognitive decline, her jaw tightened slightly. That was enough. "Tell me about the ownership structure," she said. I told her. "Robert and I had set it up in 1998 when we were first thinking about what succession would eventually look like. 60% held by me, 20% David, 20% Caroline, transferred over 15 years as a gift, a way to give them ownership in the business they'd grow up watching us build. The buy-sell agreement," Eleanor said. "Still active," I said. "We've never amended it." She looked at me over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman doing math she likes the answer to. "The majority owner has the right to purchase minority shares at fair market value," she said. "At fair market value," I confirmed. "Margaret," she put the papers down. "They spent 8 months building a trap." Quick pause. "If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. They forgot to check the foundation of the building they were standing in." I said, "I need a valuation, and I need a loan, and I need it done before February 18th. Eleanor referred me to Marcus Webb at Webb Financial Consulting in Charlotte, 22 years in business valuation, former partner at a firm that had done Fortune 500 work. He came in on a Thursday in November with 2 associates and a checklist, and spent 3 days going through every record we had. The figure he came back with was $15 million, 20% each, $3 million per child. It was fair. I had not tried to suppress the valuation. That mattered. Not because I was being generous, but because I was being correct. I wanted everything to be correct. Indisputably, documentably, legally correct. The loan came from First Southeastern Commercial Bank, the same institution that that had given us our first business line of credit in 1987, when we were still a 3-person operation. A man named Philip Greer, Senior VP of Commercial Lending, called me himself after reviewing the application. 40 years of clean financial history, he said. Margaret, this is the easiest approval I've made this year. $3 million per child, secured against the company. I signed the papers on December 6th. Eleanor filed everything the following week. And then I waited. December's Christmas party was the company tradition, the one Robert had started in 1989, and which we'd held every year since in the atrium of our main facility. Catered, open bar, the whole staff. I dressed carefully. Black dress. The pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. I was not performing anything. Or maybe I was performing exactly one thing, the role my children had written for me. Soft, a little tired, gracious in the way of a woman who is on her way out. David found me by the bar at 7:45 p.m. He was relaxed in the way of a man who believes the hard work is done and the outcome is settled. He was in a good mood. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, I will never forget the specific way the words came out, measured and deliberate, like something he'd prepared. He said, you know, Mom, most parents in your situation would be pushed out completely. You should really be grateful we still talk to you. He meant it as reassurance. I think he actually believed it was kind. I smiled at my son. I nodded. I said, you're probably right, and I excused myself to refill my water. February 18th arrived on a Tuesday. David had scheduled the board meeting 6 months in advance. I had watched the calendar invitation go out in August to the 3 external board advisors he'd recruited without my input, to Caroline, to himself. The meeting title was Strategic Transition Planning. He had not asked me to contribute an agenda item. He had, however, invited me to attend. I arrived 12 minutes early. Eleanor Marsh was already in the parking lot, waiting beside her car with a leather portfolio and the expression of a woman who has been in many rooms before the people in them knew what they were about to be in. Her associate, James Otieno, 3 years from Cornell Law School, was beside her with a banker's box of documents organized with numbered tabs. We walked in together. I took my seat at the head of the table. I do not think David had expected me to take that seat. He had set himself up at what had been serving, functionally, as the head for months, positioned in the middle of one long side, with his laptop and his slides and a small handheld remote for the projector. When he saw me at the actual head, there was a fraction of a second where something crossed his face. A recalculation. He recovered. He was good at recovering. Mom, he said warmly, glad you're here. This is going to be a really good conversation. I folded my hands on the table. Go ahead, I said. He went through the slides. He had prepared well, I'll give him that. Clean graphics, revenue projections, a timeline with milestones labeled in confident sans serif font. He talked about innovation and modernization and strategic partnerships. He showed a slide titled Hutcherson Printing, the Next Generation. He used the phrase honoring your legacy twice. Caroline did not look at me. She looked at the table in front of her, then at her phone, then at David, not at me. When David reached the final slide, the one with my name listed under advisory board, non-operational, he paused. He took a breath. He used his serious voice, the one he uses with clients when he's trying to project maturity. Mom, you've built something incredible. This company is your life's work. Nobody is trying to take that from you. We just think it's time to let the next generation take it forward. He spread his hands. You've earned the rest. I let the silence sit for a count of 5, then I turned to Eleanor. I believe you have documents to distribute. James Otieno opened the banker's box. 5 folders, one for each person in the room. David, Caroline, and the 3 external advisors, who until this moment had been told only that a business review was on the agenda. The room was quiet while people opened their folders. Then it was more quiet, in a different way. I watched David's face. Confusion came first, his eyes scanning the first page quickly, not understanding what he was reading. Then his face went still in the way faces go still when the body understands something before the mind is ready to admit it. Then, on the 3rd page, when the figure became clear, $15,000 independent valuation, Webb Financial Consulting, the color left his face. Caroline made a sound I had not heard from her before. Eleanor's voice was perfectly level. Margaret Hutcherson, as 60% majority owner of Hutcherson Printing, LLC, is exercising her rights under the 1998 buy-sell agreement to purchase all outstanding minority shares at fair market value. You are each being offered $3 million for your 20% stake. You have 30 days to accept or decline, at which point the agreement's default provisions activate. The funds are secured and available. David's chair pushed back from the table. You can't be serious. Completely serious, Eleanor said. This is our company. This is our inheritance. You can't. David, my voice was quiet. Sit down. He didn't sit down. He was on his feet, and his face had moved past shock into something that looked almost frantic. The expression of a man watching a plan he spent a year executing evaporate in real time. You're stealing from us, Caroline said. Her voice was shaking. You're doing this to punish us. I reached into my own folder. I want to read something, I said. I read David's email to Terrence Vogel, the one about cognitive decline, the one about documenting it for legal purposes. I read it slowly. The 3 external board advisors, all of them brought in by David, all of them his professional contacts, were completely still. I want to read one more, I said. I read Caroline's email about building a paper trail, about salary reduction as leverage, about documenting my erratic behavior in the November meeting, a meeting where I had, for the record, caught a $47,000 error in a supplier invoice that had been submitted for approval without a corresponding purchase order. Nobody spoke. I also want to note, Eleanor said, that the governance amendment signed by Mrs. Hutcherson in October has been reviewed by independent legal counsel and determined to have been presented as routine paperwork without material material disclosure of its implications. That determination is documented in Exhibit G of your folder. Exhibit G. My attorney had used that language deliberately, for the advisors, for the record, for the paper trail that would exist after this meeting, regardless of what my children said afterward. I looked at David. You stood in the atrium of a company I built, at a party I started, in front of people I have employed for 20 years, I said, and you told me I should be grateful you still spoke to me. His mouth opened. Nothing came out, just air. I looked at Caroline. She was looking at the table. I didn't come here to punish you, I said. I came here because this is what the documents say. This is what the agreement says. This is what the law says. I paused. Your father and I put that agreement in place in 1998 to protect the company from exactly this kind of situation. I don't think either of us imagined it would be protecting it from you specifically. But here we are. One of the external advisors, a man named Fletcher, who David had introduced to me at a luncheon in September as one of the smartest restructuring minds in the Southeast, cleared his throat. Mrs. Hutcherson, he said carefully, has this been reviewed by Eleanor Marsh, 31 years business law, Eleanor said, by Marcus Webb at Webb Financial, 22 years valuation, and by First Southeastern Commercial Bank, who have reviewed the full financial history and authorized the buyout funding. She looked at Fletcher with a pleasantness that I recognized as precisely calibrated. Would you like the contact information for any of those parties? Fletcher did not ask for the contact information. David and Caroline accepted the buyout on day 26. They had spent the 30 days, as far as I could determine, talking to their own attorneys, who told them what Eleanor had already told them, that the 1998 agreement was valid, that the valuation was defensible, that the governance amendment's problematic presentation created its own legal vulnerabilities, if they wanted to pursue that angle, and that $3 million each, delivered in 30 days, was not a figure that existed in the range of a bad outcome. David called me on a Thursday evening, 11 days before the deadline. He said without preface, "We're taking the offer." He did not apologize. He was not going to apologize. I understood that, and I had stopped waiting for it somewhere around day 14. "Okay," I said. A long silence. "I want you to know," he said, He stopped. "I want you to know that we thought we were doing what was right for the company." I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the February 14th email, build a paper trail. What about salary reduction as leverage? I thought about the Christmas party and the way he'd looked while he said it, like he was being magnanimous. "I know you did," I said. I hung up. What happened after is less dramatic, which is probably fitting. Dramatic endings feel good in the moment, but what comes after is always quieter, always more complicated, always more real. Hutcherson Printing is entirely mine now, 100%. I restructured the management. I brought in an operations director named Renata Solis, who came from a commercial printing group in Nashville and had 15 years of exactly the kind of structured process management we'd been lacking. I kept Gary in production. I kept Sherry, who deserved a raise and got one. Terrence Vogel, David's transition consultant, lost 2 other clients in the 6 months following when word circulated in Atlanta business circles about the nature of the engagement. That information didn't come from me. Eleanor Marsh simply has a professional network, and professional networks talk. I saw David at his daughter's birthday party in June. My granddaughter turned 7. She ran to me when I came through the door, and I held her in the front entryway, and over her shoulder I could see David standing in the kitchen doorway watching us. We have not had a conversation of any depth since February. I don't know if we will. That is a wound that might not close. Not because I want it that way, but because trust, once it has been used as a structural weakness to exploit, doesn't simply rebuild in the places it's been damaged. I am honest enough with myself to know that. What I know is this.